Welcome to the Triathlon Nutrition Academy podcast, the show designed to serve you up evidence-based sports nutrition advice from the experts. Hi, I'm your host Taryn, accredited practicing dietitian, advanced sports dietitian, and founder of Dietitian Approved. Listen as I break down the latest evidence to give you practical, easy to digest strategies to train hard, recover faster, and perform at your best. You have so much potential, and I want to help you unlock that with the power of nutrition. Let's get into it. Did you know that 20 to 45% of the global population is sleep deprived? Isn't that crazy? That is so many people that aren't getting enough sleep. And that's a lot considering how much insufficient sleep or sleep deprivation is linked to negative outcomes. We've got obviously impaired mental function. I don't know about you, but my brain doesn't work particularly well when I'm tired. Your mood is definitely impacted, which again, if you've been tired for an extended period of time, you'll know what I'm talking about. But also you have increased risk of illness and an increased risk of injury. It can also be a struggle to manage your body composition, and obviously productivity is pretty low. But then chronically, this sleep deprivation and sleep hole can lead to mental health disorders and lots of cardiometabolic disease as well, which is really, really scary. So there's lots of things that are set up to try and help us get better sleep as a result of that. Now, despite what you might think, the actual recommendations for sleep are 7 to 9 hours. And I often hear that people think that they survive or wear with a badge of honor that they only need 5 hours of sleep a night or 6 hours of sleep a night. And it's just ridiculous. I hate having arguments with people about that. Why would you shoot yourself in the foot by not doing the best things that you can for your body and your overall health and feeling like sleeping is a waste of time? Now, obviously, how much sleep you need is very individual, but 4, 5, or even 6 hours a night is not enough, particularly for somebody that's really active. Some people need more than 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. I know a lot of high-level athletes, and particularly younger growing bodies, that need 10, 11, 12 hours of sleep some nights when they're in big training volumes. So it's really important that we prioritize our sleep so that we're getting good quality and duration for what our body needs. Personally, I'm a 9-hour sleeper, and while a lot of people over my professional career have argued that's a complete waste of time, I'm so much more productive and really effing efficient in my waking hours. And I know that I feel like crap if I get less than 8, which has been really hard as a parent of little people, because I will often get less than 8 and I don't feel very good for that. So because we know how important sleep is, there are actually lots of tools and strategies that have been developed to help people get better sleep. And we're talking about quantity here, so total number of hours, but also the quality is really important. You can be in bed for 9 hours and have a really crappy quality night's sleep. Now, one of the things that I'm interested in from a nutrition perspective is caffeine, and understanding how to manage that to make sure we're not affecting our sleep, both quality and quantity, and the timing that needs to kind of be cut off by. Caffeine is a very socially acceptable drug. It's actually a psychostimulant, and it is the most researched supplement that exists. 80% of the world consumes caffeine in one form or another. Now, that doesn't have to be coffee. I immediately go to coffee when I think caffeine, but it could be tea, it could be caffeine in gels or blocks or sports drink. It could be energy drinks that a lot of people are consuming these days that have a very high amount of caffeine. It could be things like caffeine tablets and pills that are a caffeine supplement. So 80% of the world consumes some form of caffeine, which is pretty crazy. Now, it works by stimulating the central nervous system. It helps to reduce our perception of fatigue and effort, but also reduces our perception of sleepiness, which is why a lot of people are habitual caffeine users. They get up and they feel tired, and so they drink some coffee or a cup of tea or have some form of caffeine to help them get over that slump. Caffeine does have what's called a long half-life. So it's very individual, but it's around 3 to 6 hours. Some people shorter, some people even longer, which means that over a certain period of time, half of that caffeine dose is still in your system. So say you had 200 milligrams of caffeine, and assuming your half-life processing time is 5 hours, 5 hours later, 100 milligrams of that caffeine is still in your system. So one of the strategies that you can implement to help manage your sleep and not be affected by caffeine with sleep is to keep it as far away from it as possible. So I've always recommended athletes not consume caffeine after about lunchtime. And that's not based on anything other than just practical experience, because we didn't actually know the specific quantifiable doses of caffeine and timing to give specific recommendations around that to not affect our sleep, duration and quality, and also your ability to fall asleep. So I was really excited to see a new research paper that I just read all about the effect of caffeine on our subsequent sleep. It's a big systematic review and meta-analysis. It was published in 2023, so it's hot off the press. I'll link it in the show notes if you do want to nerd up and go and read it. But a meta-analysis in particular is the highest level of research caliber. It's nice and robust. And I've read through the methods and really understood deeply what type of studies they've pulled for this meta-analysis. So there was 24 studies in total that they collected data on, and it was done in healthy adults aged 18 to 65 was their range. So it's not done specifically in triathlon. It's not done specifically in an athlete population, just general healthy adults. And to save you nerding up and reading it, this is their key findings, which is really, really exciting because we can now quantify that advice around caffeine dose and timing so that we're not affecting our sleep that night. So they found that caffeine consumption reduced total sleep time by 45 minutes and sleep efficiency by 7%, with an increase in sleep onset latency of 9 minutes. So it took you longer to get to sleep. And then your wake up after sleep onset of 12 minutes. So you're not actually getting into sleep particularly effectively, and then you're waking up afterwards just by consuming caffeine. Now, the duration and the proportion of light sleep increased with caffeine intake. So you're in a lighter phase of sleep for longer. And the duration and proportion of our deep sleep decreased with caffeine intake. So that quality of sleep is reduced with caffeine. Now, the closer to bedtime and the higher the caffeine dose, the greater the reduction in total sleep time. So it's a big vicious circle. You have a poor sleep, you consume more caffeine to stimulate your wakefulness, get you out of that hole, and that impacts your subsequent sleep the next night so that your duration of sleep is shorter and the quality of that sleep is not as good compared to if you didn't have caffeine. And I see that with people a lot. It's a drug and we kind of get addicted to it and we feel like we need it to get awake in the morning. And then we build a tolerance to it and our total amount of caffeine intake we consume in a day just keeps slowly building over time until you're at the point where you're at 2, 3, maybe 4 cups of coffee or tea or something in a day and you feel like you need it because we're then affecting our sleep the next night and it's not as great. Even though you might feel like you did go to sleep, we're in a light phase of sleep for longer and we're not in that really good deep quality sleep where a lot of our recovery pathways occur. So it's really cool research to understand what is actually going on because we've always known that caffeine affects sleep, but the paper quantified exact dosings of caffeine and timing away from sleep to understand where is our cutoff point for it being affected versus it not being affected. So I've got some good recommendations for you. Now, you know I love me a good cup of coffee. Coffee is life. So take it or leave it. But there's some beautiful evidence-based guidelines to guide your caffeine consumption to maximize your sleep quality. So if you want to avoid the reduction in total sleep time, then a cup of coffee, which based on the analysis was 107 milligrams of caffeine per 250 ml cup. So your coffee might be weaker than that or it might be even stronger than that. But that dose of caffeine, 107 milligrams, needs to be consumed at least 8.8 hours prior to bedtime. So if you go to bed at 9 o'clock at night, because you're a triathlete, then that means no caffeine after midday. If you go to bed earlier than that, you need to bring that forwards. And if you go to bed a bit later than that, like if you're a 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night sleeper, then you could shift it back a little bit. But 8.8 hours before bed is your cutoff where that dose of caffeine, 107 milligrams, is going to start affecting your sleep. Now, if we want to increase the dose, they found that a standard serve of a pre-workout supplement, which was 217.5 milligrams, should be consumed at least 13.2 hours prior to bedtime. So if you go to bed at 9 o'clock at night, you can't have that amount of caffeine no later than 8 a.m. in the morning. And then low doses, so 47 milligrams of caffeine per 250 mils in something like a weak black instant coffee, they didn't really find a clear effect or a reduction in total sleep time. So that might be something that you could have and it not negatively impact your sleep. I'm not saying that you should. Now, of course, it's going to be individual because we have higher caffeine processors, like faster processors, slower processors. We have caffeine non-responders. So that's some really good data to work from and to pin from. And then you need to understand how your body works and what works for you. But I really love the vicious cycle thing and thinking about that so that if you do have a really poor night of sleep, let's not try and fix that with more caffeine. Just, write that day off as a not particularly effective, not particularly productive day where you maybe just feel really flat so that you're not impacting that night's sleep further. Because we know that even mild sleep restriction, so about an hour, that's going to disrupt your emotional regulation and impair your cognitive function, so your brain function, and your behavior of as little as an hour in one night. And then if you compound that over time, say over 14 days or 2 weeks of 1 hour a night less sleep, that effect is equated to an entire night of sleep deprivation. So we need to get off that rat wheel if you are finding that you're becoming more reliant on caffeine to get you through the day, because it is affecting us negatively. And the more that happens, the worse that's going to get. Now, I also want you to think about applying that practically to your training. If you're practicing strategies like caffeine in training, but also race day. If you're doing a longer course event and you're having caffeine, maybe on the bike or the run, is that before midday and you go to bed at 9 o'clock that night? Maybe you go to bed earlier that night because you're shattered. But think about that timing of that dose of caffeine in your racing and where that sits based on where you're going to sleep. Because I know a lot of people, and I've seen a lot of people consume way more than 107 milligrams of caffeine in a serving or in a race. Depends on your requirements. We're not going to dive into that in this episode. This one is purely about sleep, but being mindful of that. And a lot of people are like, oh, who cares? My race is finished. I don't care if I sleep the next night or not. I'll be so tired that I'm just going to go to bed anyway. But know that your total duration of sleep that night and the quality is not going to be great. And so your recovery is affected. And that's really important to understand because we often just stop thinking about ourselves and our body and our nutrition once we cross the finish line. And I love to teach my academy athletes to extend their thinking beyond just that immediate post-exercise recovery window into, multiple days after and like the week after, because sleep is our ultimate form of recovery. Plus, we also need to make sure we're putting the right building blocks of nutrition back in. A lot of athletes will find themselves sick or injured a couple of weeks after a race. And you don't equate the two things together because it is so far away. But if you've ever experienced that, 2, 3, 4 weeks after a race, you're really sick, you've picked up a cold or a flu, or you've got niggly injuries, then that has been impacted by race day, and we need to align them. So thinking about high doses of caffeine on race day, not having great sleep to recover on race evening, we need to do as much as we can to set ourselves up to recover as best as we possibly can. and knowing that that sleep quality might not be great. You're going to wake up the next morning and probably feel pretty tired. Yes, you've just done a triathlon, but also your sleep's not probably been that great if you've had a fair whack of caffeine close to bed. So just food for thought. I really loved reading this paper. I know that sounds super nerdy. That is what I did with my Wednesday night, like a loser. But it's really good research that we haven't seen before to quantify doses of caffeine and duration of away from sleep. So some nice little guidelines there to guide us. Now, another thought, if you're a habitual caffeine user, you do seem to adapt to your caffeine intake. This is come from rodent studies. It's not actually been established in humans, but they found that the more caffeine they gave them and, more consistent they were with that over the time, they seem to just adapt their whole systems and pathways for caffeine regulation in a way. So I say that because I know a lot of people are heavily addicted to caffeine and relatively large amounts on a day-to-day basis. And you might be like, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. I go to sleep fine. I wake up fine. I drink my 4 cups of coffee a day. I'm all good. But I would encourage you to think about the dose and think about the timing, because we all could do with better sleep. If 20 to 45% of the global population are sleep deprived, let's try and do something to fix that. So if you do want to dive into this new research update, I will link it in the show notes. It is pretty heavy going, I'm not going to lie, but some pretty sweet recommendations off the back of it and relatively hot off the press. It was published back in February 2023. So thanks for nerding out with me today. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want more research updates like this, please let me know. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Triathlon Nutrition Academy podcast. I would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or want to share with me what you've learnt, email me at podcast@dietitianapproved.com. You could also spread the word by leaving me a review and taking a screenshot of you listening to the show. Don't forget to tag me on social media at dietitian.approved so I can give you a shout out too. If you want to learn more about what we do, head to dietitianapproved.com. And if you want to learn more about the Triathlon Nutrition Academy program, head to dietitianapproved.com/academy. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to helping you smash it in the 4th leg. Nutrition!